Hi, everyone. I'm Eric Vondi, Preservation Program Manager for the Arizona State Historic Preservation Office. Welcome to the 11th webinar in our ongoing Preservation in Place series hosted by the Arizona Preservation Foundation and the Arizona State Historic Preservation Office. Today's webinar, How a Single Citizen Can Make a Difference in Strengthening a Historic Preservation Culture, featuring Steve Schumacher, focuses on advocacy, which is something crucial that our office usually cannot engage in. Working in government, you find that your role is defined by what the laws and statutes that govern your agencies and programs allow. For example, nearly half of our office hours are devoted to something called Section 106, which is a process that agencies undertake when doing projects that can affect historic properties. We're also involved with determining if properties are eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places and then helping people list properties on the National Register of Historic Places. These two follow processes. Government tends to be about process. Some years ago, someone asked me if it was our job to save buildings, and I thought about this and realized that technically it's not. It's our job to identify buildings that are eligible for listing on the National Register and to help people list those buildings. We have some incentives that help people maintain historic properties. And we have things like Section 106, which is a process involving agencies going through a process which hopefully will save a historic property, but it's not always going to work out that way. So our job is really about following these processes to hopefully these good conclusions, which shows the importance of advocacy, for they do the things that government agencies can't do. One big example is when it comes to legislative bills that affect historic preservation in our state. Our position as a state agency is officially neutral. It's up to the advocates to publicly support what we may personally support, but publicly cannot. Now, May is National Historic Preservation Month, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation releases their annual 11 Most Endangered Properties during this time. This morning, this year's list was released, and it contained a property in Arizona. Arizona properties have appeared on this list only a handful of times. And appearing on the 11 most endangered list is both hopeful and distressing. It's hopeful because it brings much needed attention to an important property that many people may not know about, but it's distressing that a property has reached that level of endangerment. The property in question is called Camp Naco. Camp Naco joins 10 other equally important properties, such as a petroglyph-filled cave in Missouri, a Richard Neutra-designed elementary school in Guam, and a 19th century Jewish mortuary in Connecticut. If you're unfamiliar with Naco, it's a small unincorporated border town of about 1,000 people due south of Bisbee. Camp Naco is a century-old military base to the north of that town. To quote the National Trust, representing the multi-layered and complicated history of the American Southwest, Camp Naco is a touchstone for the history of Buffalo soldiers and the contributing Black regiments who served in the then segregated Army in the years following the Civil War, specifically in the Western United States. Constructed by the U.S. Army beginning in 1919 to create a more permanent military presence and stabilize the U.S.-Mexico border area during the Mexican Revolution, Camp Naco's adobe buildings are the only ones remaining of the 35 permanent camps built during that time. After the camp was decommissioned for military use in 1923, the site passed through several owners and has suffered vandalism, exposure, erosion, and fire. The city of Bisbee now owns Camp Naco and is working closely with the Naco Heritage Alliance, the Southwest Association of Buffalo Soldiers, and other Arizona organizations to identify critical funding and partnerships to restore the historic camp buildings. They hope to revive the structures for community and educational uses, heritage tourism, and recognition of the critical role of the Buffalo Soldiers in the American Southwest. When I first visited the property in 2007, it had been abandoned for some time. Graffiti covered many surfaces, asbestos roof shingles littered the ground, and there was much debris left from the many temporary occupants that had been there over the years. Fires had destroyed a couple of the buildings. Since then, funding was secured and Camp Naco was cleaned up, fenced off, and interpretive signs put up around the outside of it. All of that was done because of advocates. and advocates continue to fight to give it a future. There's been plenty of ideas over the years for what could happen to Camp Naco, including, artist colonies, border patrol housing, etc. And all of those things are still on the table. But without the work of such advocates, Camp Naco would be in a significantly worse shape than it is today. Advocacy can save properties. In fact, it can save every property on that most endangered list. Advocacy can save most properties, in fact. Without them, we're pretty much dead in the water. Now I'd like to introduce Donna Reiner from our statewide nonprofit partner, the Arizona Preservation Foundation.
Good afternoon. As Eric mentioned, I'm Donna Reiner. I happen to be the secretary for the Arizona Preservation Foundation. And as the statewide organization, we primarily look at things that, of course, are statewide and assist local preservation groups in their issues, giving them moral support, possibly even some small grants. But this particular series evolved when we had to cancel our 2020, because of COVID, conference. And so we decided we would do the preservation in place, as Eric mentioned. Almost all of those 11 webinars that we have done have been recorded, and they are available on our YouTube channel and also on our website. In the chat, I have posted our YouTube address in case you would like to look at that. We also have in October 19th through the 21st, our conference in Yuma. And we're always looking for a call for sessions and sponsors. This particular talk that's going to be given today, I actually heard it at a previous conference. So it you don't have to be a formal preservationist, you don't have to belong to a preservation foundation, but you can have some great ideas that you can share. We also, on our website, which is azpreservation.org, have Preservation Month activities that are happening around the state. And if you know of any, we will be more than happy to list them. And now I would like to introduce Steve Schumer. Oh, another thing. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and then we will have a time for the Q&A at the end of Steve's presentation. But Steve, as I said, I met them actually through a history group, but this presentation really intrigued me. He's a great public speaker and author, leadership consultant, and he has developed over time a passion for the history of the greater Phoenix area. He's authored 2 papers about the history of Phoenix, has given numerous presentations around the valley about Phoenix history. He just said he gave one the other night, and he's closely worked with the staff of Pueblo Grande Museum and the city of Phoenix to increase education and awareness of our heritage throughout the valley. And he's also been featured on PBS Horizon and KTAR radio programs. And Steve, it's all yours now.
Great. Thank you, Donna. I appreciate that. I always cringe when I hear those introductions because I wonder if you got the wrong bio there or something. That's pretty impressive in many ways. And the other thing that's interesting for those of you that haven't presented on Zoom or done any of these things is there's that commercial on television. I'm sure you've seen it where they're talking about that guy. He doesn't have any pants on. They talk about seeing his upper thighs. I'm always concerned about where I have my laptop sitting when I'm doing these things from home. Thank you again for the introduction, Donna, and the opportunity to speak to everybody. I see some names popping up of good friends of mine and other historians. So welcome to all of you. That's another scary proposition because the people that I know, the other historians, they know the kind of things I'm supposed to be saying. So please be gentle, my friends. A little background about me. Donna mentioned my career. The thing that keeps the lights on, the electricity paid for, is I've been in the leadership and change consulting business for more decades than I care to mention. And I travel all around North America, helping organizations, leaders, managers, supervisors, all kinds of of decision makers move their organizations through change, and specifically from an employee standpoint. And one of the stories that I like to tell about my introduction to the whole business of change and moving organizations forward and helping people be more productive and successful is when I was much younger, obviously, and I was a freshly minted MBA out of ASU and thought I had my act together. I had spent a couple years as a financial analyst working for a large aerospace company in San Diego. And I got into the consulting business, and part of my education with how to be a consultant was I traveled to a town in West Virginia, a coal mine, and the consulting company I was working with, a small boutique company, we specialized in improving safety and productivity and quality in different kinds of operations. And we were there to help this coal mine improve their safety record. And the president of the coal mine, this is a little town called Beckley, West Virginia, and the president of the coal mine, he actually was introducing my colleague and I to the graveyard shift in the underground coal mine. And we're sitting in this shed, the safety shed, they called it. And we're all sitting in folding chairs, and it's about 6 a.m. And these guys, and they were all guys, they just come up above ground from the underground mine. They had their hard hats on with their mining lights on the front. As you can imagine, they're covered with coal dust and so forth. And these people are looking at my buddy and I, who we were in our late 20s, around 30, these hotshot consultants from Southern California. And they're looking at us, and I actually got a little bit scared at the way these people were looking at us. And the president of the company was introducing us, telling the rest of these employees what we're going to be doing. And there was a guy in the back row who I could see out of the corner of my eye, and I could see him rip off the corner of a cardboard box. And so he just had a flat piece of cardboard in front of him, and he grabbed a piece of coal and he was writing on that. And of course that caught my eye and made me really curious. And so he stuck the piece of cardboard down underneath, off to the side of the chair, just where I could see it. And it said, "When this is over, I'm going to kick your tush," just to be politically correct. And I thought, oh, there's got to be more to the change consulting business than being fearful for my life based on one of the customers that we're going to be dealing with. But that was my introduction. And I had gone into the situation thinking, well, I was a financial analyst. I know about downsloping curves and data and baselines and all this kind of stuff. But I learned pretty quickly that situation and several others, that in order to be successful in any kind of intervention or any kind of change, whether it's historic preservation or helping safety in a coal mine or whatever it might be, you have to garner the trust of people first. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how many degrees you have. If people are leery of you and they don't trust you, then you're not going to make any progress. And I carried that learning over to all the other business and the different organizations I worked with over my career. And I try my best to apply that to the situations here in Phoenix that I encounter as well. I worked with a car company not a lot of people are personally familiar with, but you know it by name, Mazda. They had some really well-known cars, the Miata and so forth. And they were spread all around North America. And I was brought in to help Ford Motor Company integrate with them. And so the first thing I did, having learned this value, the value of trust, is I spent 3 months traveling all around North America, getting face to face with as many people as I could, whether in groups or one-on-one, just to help build a little bit of trust. And over the course of about 3 months, I was able to get in front of about 90% of all the Mazda employees in North America. And that was important because I was only one person and I needed to have trust with all the other people if I expected to get anything done. So I'm going to talk about a number of specifics in my presentation, but the main thing I would love all of you to carry out of this talk is that if you're trying to get somebody else to do something differently, you've got to establish trust first, or they will just go through the motions and probably nod politely, but then talk behind your back. So here's the purpose of our time together. There's a couple of these slides, by the way, just a heads up. Donna said I've got about an hour, so I tend to over prepare. So some of the slides I might go through a little more quickly than you might feel good about. But if you want any of this information, I know this is being recorded, but if you want any of these slides or any of this information, I will share with you. Just ask. I'm happy to share anything and everything. But my overall purpose in this time is really just to give each of you 1 to 2 ideas, tools, tips to help you make a difference. I don't anticipate that anybody is going to take everything I say and be able to apply it or even want to apply it and be successful. But if you can take just 1 or 2 ideas away with you and then implement them, put them into practice and be successful, then I've accomplished what I try to accomplish in this hour. So I want to make a point there with the term process versus tactics. Some of these slides that you're going to see in these words are specific to what I personally have been involved in around the world of saving old buildings. Eric had mentioned saving old buildings. That's really what I'm all about, is trying to save old buildings. And so some of the things you're going to see on the screen are specific to that, but I really want you to pay more attention to the process here of change as opposed to the individual tactics, because people are going to apply different strategies and tactics. But my process is very specific. It's very systematic. So I'd like you to pay more attention to the process as opposed to the specific tactics that you're going to see on the screen. So some of the tools I'll talk about is just a few analytical tools. Like I mentioned, I have a bachelor's degree in business and a master's degree in business as well. I spent several years as a financial analyst. I actually was a bean counter for a couple of years. People that know me pretty well find that pretty surprising, but that was my job. So I'll go through a couple analytical tools with you. Then we'll talk about passion, because whatever you're trying to do, whatever you're trying to change, if you don't have a passion for it, if you're not driven by your own motivation, when you hit some of the really rough spots, which you will, it's tough to keep going sometimes. So we'll talk a little bit about passion. We'll talk about clarity, the importance not only of understanding exactly what it is you're trying to accomplish, but the other side of that is the more you understand, the more clear it is in your mind, the easier and more impactful it is for you to communicate that to others. Because more often than not, you are not the decision maker to make change happen, but you need to communicate a sense of urgency and clarity to the decision makers. So it's important you understand exactly what it is you're trying to accomplish. And then I'll mention a little bit more about trust. Trust is the cornerstone of change. It's the cornerstone of leadership. It's the cornerstone of management. It's a cornerstone of all kinds of things that involve people. And whenever you're trying to change organizations and so forth, change is a big part of it, and trust is a cornerstone of that. Credibility, you need to know what you're talking about. People are not going to pay too much attention to you if you don't know what you're talking about. And then the whole idea of professional follow-up. There's a fine line between being a pest and being professional with the follow-up that you put in place. So those are some of the tools that we'll spend a little time talking about. As Donna mentioned, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll reserve some time at the end, and I'll try to address as many of those questions as I can. The final little piece, the tool that I found to be really important is patience. Especially, and I've learned that in this situation, trying to get some change happening in Phoenix around historic buildings and saving old buildings and educating people about the history and heritage of Phoenix. It takes a lot of patience because there are a lot of setbacks. There's just because you have a sense of urgency or I have a sense of urgency about something has absolutely no bearing on whether or not other people have a sense of urgency. So you got to be patient as well. And I'll give you an example of what happened in my case, and a couple of the people that are in the audience will know about this. But it was October of 2020, the 150th anniversary of the Phoenix town site was in October of 2020. The town site of Phoenix was actually formalized and dedicated and so forth in October of 1870. So when I was doing my research, I discovered that and I presented it to the mayor and the city council and a number of other people. And thankfully, Mayor Gallego and City Councilwoman Thelda Williams and Councilwoman Pastor took a real interest in paying attention to this and celebrating it. And so I was called by Councilwoman Thelda Williams, and she wanted to get a working group together. And in about January of 2020, we started working on some things to put together in anticipation of the anniversary in October of 2020. So in January, we had a meeting. There were several other representatives of downtown Phoenix, a couple of the other groups. Kari Carlisle from Heritage Square was involved. I was involved. The two council people were involved. And we put together, first of all, a whole list of all the things that we were going to do and try to accomplish in the 10 months between January and October. So as I'm talking, you've probably read a few of these things, but this was a working document. These are the things that we were going to put together. Tabletop model, Phoenix schools curriculum, children's book, some others, historic markers, designated Phoenix history, artifacts repository, school kids do projects and those kinds of things. So we had a really nice laundry list and giving me and my goals of what I was trying to accomplish. I'd go to these meetings and I was on cloud 9 because all these things were going to happen. And of course, without anybody raising your hands and so forth, we all know what happened around February and March, October of 2020, right? All of a sudden, everything shut down, COVID struck, and our whole list, our meetings, everything kind of went by the wayside. So in the time that I had started working on this, when I first moved back to Phoenix from California in the fall of 2017, so just a little over about 1.5 to 2 years, and all of it was starting to come to fruition. All of a sudden, the plug was pulled on everything, and so that's where I learned I got to be patient. And when you have the plug pulled on everything, which COVID did for a lot of us, you have a choice. Do you give up and move on to other things, or do you just see that as a temporary halt to the progress and then pick up back where you left off? So I chose to keep going. Now, just a little bit of information, how my personal passion, and I'll mention it again, if you're not passionate about what you're trying to do, you're not going to make the progress that you really feel like you can. And my passion for all this Phoenix history and so forth started when I was living in California, and I was in Phoenix on a business trip, and it didn't hit 122. Those of you that are looking at that headline and remembering that day in 1990, the day I was here, it was 118. And I asked myself that same question we've all asked if you've lived here or visited, why in the world did people even come here in the first place? And so I've always been interested in history. So I started digging into it and I thought, why in the world did people come here in the first place? And on top of that, personally, I have a hard time sleeping if it's too warm. And so I thought, how in the world did they sleep before air conditioning? It's just these burning questions, no pun intended. But I thought, how in the world did all this happen? Why did they come here? It was maybe a little bit cooler, but not substantially cooler in those days. And so I started digging into it and started researching, especially the sleeping part. It just intrigued me. Why in the world, how in the world did people sleep comfortably at night without air conditioning? And of course, those of you that know, they slept outside. They moved their beds outside. Some people strung up sheets, wet, watered down sheets, hoping to catch a breeze and so forth. This actually is a picture, if any of you are familiar with the Peterson Mansion in Tempe. This is the Peterson family, where they moved their sleeping arrangements out into their yard. So that satisfied my curiosity. But along the way, I discovered that the history of Phoenix and the care and the caretaking of the history and the heritage of our pioneers as really, I don't even know how to tread lightly around this, but the city of Phoenix has not done a very good job of honoring our history and our heritage. And the term I've started using more often is our civic memory. And this is a picture of up till about 1930-ish, somewhere in there. Once a year, Dwight Hurd, the Arizona Republic, sponsored a whole weekend, 2 or 3 day celebration of the pioneers of Arizona. And whoever was living from the early days, they all gathered in Phoenix. They had all these cars that they had a big parade, and they went to Riverside Park, which was on Central Avenue and the riverbed. And they had big celebrations for all the pioneers, and they honored them. And there's huge stories in the newspaper. And then all of a sudden, about 1930, 35, I couldn't find any more stories about honoring the history and heritage of our pioneers. And I thought, nah, that's not right. This is a unique town. It's a young town. It has a very interesting history. It needs to be paid more attention to. And so I decided, well, I'm going to see what I can do about that. And so we've all heard this definition of insanity, right? Hopefully you're repeating it to yourself without me having to ask. But I thought, okay, there's been a lot of things that have happened over time, but I'm not going to continue to do what has been done in the past, because if it hasn't worked, then that's the definition of insanity. I'm going to try to do some things different. And so I started calling upon my own history around the change process and thought, okay, well, what can I do? So the first thing I thought, and based on my consulting business and my consulting career and looking at organizations, without just taking a knee-jerk reaction and so forth, I thought, well, one of the most effective tools I've ever used in terms of analyzing organizations and situations is what's called a SWOT analysis. And you may or may not have heard of it. Basically, what it stands for, SWOT, stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And a SWOT analysis is a technique for assessing these 4 aspects of your organization. So what you want to do, and it usually is most effective in conjunction with other people, is look at your situation, look at your organization, and be real honest and say, okay, what are we doing well? What are we doing not so well? What opportunities do we have out there? And what kinds of threats do we have facing us as an organization? So I took the SWOT analysis and I applied it to what I could see from the city of Phoenix paying attention to its history and heritage. And so this is what I put together, and this had been about 3 years ago. So you can see strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And just having it on paper, then you can try to maximize strengths, overcome the weaknesses, and so forth. So that's a first analytical tool, is take a good hard look at what your organization is doing, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, a second analytical tool, again, you may or may not have heard of this. I try to put it in shorthand terms, but every organization, just like human beings, we have a life cycle. We're born, we prosper, we mature, and then we start to fade out. So definition, organizational life cycle, as the name suggests, is the life cycle of an organization from the point of its creation or onset to the point it is terminated. And you can think of all kinds of organizations that started out like a ball of fire and then matured, made a lot of, had a lot of successes, and then just faded over time. Same thing with people. It is believed that like human beings, organizations also are born, they grow and mature with time, and there comes a stage when they start declining, and like any other human being, die. Still, it's a fact that every life follows a pattern, and this seems predictable for every organization. So whether it's a profit or for-profit organization, not-for-profit, governmental, public, private, every organization follows a fairly predictable pattern in terms of its organization life cycle. And then it's up to the decision makers within that organization to realize and understand all the phases of the organizational life cycle so that they can understand the priorities of that stage and make decisions accordingly that will work best for that period. So essentially what all those words and that ant farm looking screen means is you have to pay attention to how your organization is doing from a growth, maturity, development standpoint. And so I took this same concept, the life cycle concept, and applied it to what I saw as, again, the city of Phoenix paying attention to its history and heritage. And so you can see the stages down at the bottom. And then I put some specifics. Everybody remember, not everybody, but remember very beginning, John Driggs, Terry Goddard, the commission was put together, the Historic Preservation Department. There was a lot of things that were done, the Rawson House, the Orpheum, all kinds of things. And then from my estimation, you know, we're kind of in this point right now, we're at the peak at paying attention to this stuff, but there's a lot more that we can do to get back on track. So this again is to take a hard look at where are you in your organization or what you're trying to accomplish in terms of the life cycle of the organization. The other is you can always follow the money. And fortunately, well, fortunately or unfortunately, there's been a lot of money spent on education and preservation and so forth over the years. Actually, and Mayor Gallego, I actually was lucky enough to meet with her about 6 weeks ago. She was the one who told me it was $43 million in bond money had been spent. So that's another piece of data, another piece of information to take a look at when you're assessing the organization. And that's what that little graph shows. So now, once you've done a little bit of analyzing, there's other tools out there. There's force field analysis, where you look at the driving forces and restraining forces with an organization and the efforts you're putting forward. But now I want to talk a little bit about the individual and what you can do as an individual. And one of the things to really pay attention to is understand what kind of power do you have, because things happen because people have power, different kinds of power. And depending on what source you look at or resource you look at, you'll see different words for these kinds of power. Some places you'll see 4, some you'll see 5, etc. So this is just my look at the different types of power. One type of power is what's called position power, and it's derived from formal accountability in an organization. You may be a manager, you may be a director, you may be a senior director, you may have a certain title, you may have 10 people that report to you, you may be an individual contributor, whatever. But position power within organizations, these are boxes on organizational charts and so forth. So that is position power. Typically, the Like for instance, in Phoenix, the city manager, Jeff Barton, has the most position power within the city of Phoenix. So that's a good example of what position power is all about. Second type of power is what's called referent power. It's derived through association with someone else that has position or legitimate power. Example, if I wanted to get something done with the head of the Parks and Recreation Department, I walk in their door and say, hey, Jeff Barton sent me. That's what's called referent power. They'll probably laugh me out of the office, but that's an example, if you have that kind of power, how it may or may be used at some point. If you as an individual trying to get something done are associated with someone else who has position or legitimate power, then that gives you a little bit of power as an individual also. The third type of power I like to talk about is called expert power, and it's derived from knowing a great deal about the subject at hand. A lot of us, me, for instance, when I first started all this, I really didn't know that much about Phoenix history. I was curious and I like history. So I applied those two things, and I've become fairly knowledgeable about Phoenix history. So that's expert power. You want people like brain surgeons and CPAs, people like that. You want them to have a lot of expert power. If they're messing with your brain or your money, that's a good thing for them to have. And then the fourth type of power is what's called personal power. And this type of power is derived from being a good listener and having good interpersonal skills. These are things like being able to ask good questions, show empathy, be a good active listener, rephrasing, various active listening skills. Those all, being friendly, being trustworthy, those kinds of, having integrity, having ethics, those are all different aspects of having personal power. So from a standpoint, again, of trying to get something to happen and make some change happen and influence people, it's important that you understand exactly what kind of power do you have as an individual. So just a little bit of a soapbox about change. And we all kind of know this. You either know it like I do, because that's been my career for decades, or you just know it because you tried to experience change, but change can be painfully slow. Change does not happen at an organization level. Change happens at individual levels, and people change at different speeds. And in some cases, it can be painfully slow. People change at their pace, not yours. So if you're in a situation, again, where you're trying to get somebody to do something differently, they're not going to do it at your pace. They're going to do it at their pace. They may smile politely and they may tell you, oh, I didn't get that email, or, oh my gosh, my Zoom meeting thing broke, I couldn't attend, those kinds of things. But people will change at their pace, not yours. And I put that acronym WIIFM. And what that stands for in the vernacular is called WIFM, or what's in it for me. So if you're the person who's trying to get some change to happen, it's a good move on your part to try to understand what is the WIFM for the people you're trying to get to change. Because they're not going to change unless you understand what's in it for them and you try to approach them in that regard. Identify the decision makers and influencers, not NIMBYs. If you haven't heard that term, it's not in my backyard. There's a lot of people, they just take a stand. They just resist change, period. And they don't want anything changed in their world. So you're not looking for NIMBYs, you're not looking for naysayers, you're not looking for chronic complainers or yeah, but you shoulds. You've heard those kinds of people. All they do is they look for cracks in what you're trying to put forward. They're trying to circumvent what you're saying or counter what you're saying. And I call them yeah, but you shoulds, because their response is, whenever you present something to them, they'll look at you and say, yeah, but you should go this direction, or you should do it this way, or you should go after that person, or you should talk to this. So those are not the people you're looking for. You're looking for real decision makers and influencers. And influencers are not necessarily high up on organization charts all the time. They're informal sometimes, but people flock to them and they're compelling and they have charisma and so forth. So if you're trying to get change to happen, you want to look for decision makers and influencers. The other thing I learned many years ago is politicians want to get reelected. And I'll repeat that. Politicians want to get reelected. Politicians want to get reelected. Doesn't mean they're bad people and so forth, but the first priority for many politicians is they want to get reelected. So reelection comes from votes. Votes come from a lot of people. So oftentimes politicians, we all know this, they'll tend to gravitate toward decisions that will please the larger numbers of people. And unfortunately, sometimes you may not be in that large number of people that they're focusing on. Tactful persistence is key. I mentioned a little bit earlier, we walk a fine line when we're trying to get change to happen between being a pest and being tactful with our persistence and follow-up. I've been working with the director of social media, working with him, try to get some things onto Facebook and Instagram around Phoenix history and educate people. And he's been doing a really, really good job. And we first met probably a year and a half ago where there was a real blatant error in something he posted on Facebook about Phoenix history. And so I approached him by email and I kind of gave him some other thoughts. And so about 2 months later, he asked if I would meet with him for coffee. And I said, yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about this stuff. And he first thing he had to say was, Steve, a lot of people criticize what I have to say, but he said, you handled it tactfully. And plus you gave me a suggestion. And he said, that made a difference. And so when you're dealing with people, you've got to be tactful in your feedback and criticism and your persistence with them. And then watch for the tipping point. Again, the tipping point, which is defined there as a critical point in an evolving situation that leads to new and irreversible development. I put the 150th anniversary example in there, the 150th anniversary of the Phoenix town site, because I'd spent a year and a half, 2 years trying to network and meet people and decision makers and influencers. And we got to the point where I was meeting once a month with 2 city council people and different groups from downtown Phoenix and so forth, and the civic center and all kinds of things. And I thought, okay, I've now reached the tipping point. It's going to take on a life of its own. And unfortunately, COVID intervened. And so we really had to start over on a lot of fronts. But that's an example of the tipping point. You have to keep moving forward, keep meeting people, persuading people, stating your case, offering help and so forth till you get to that tipping point. Now, one of the things about facilitating change, and I was lucky enough to learn this early on in my consulting career, as you see up there in that blue picture, what that is meant to represent is a web of accountability and power and politics and so forth. You know, in organizations, whether it's governmental or private or public or nonprofit or for-profit, whatever it is, there's a whole web of all those different dynamics going on within the organization. And that X represents you as an individual. And if you find yourself in the middle of that entire web, the amount of impact you can have is limited, because you have a boss and a boss's boss, and you have other people that are horizontally in other departments who may or may not want to interact with you, those kinds of things. So when that X represents you and you find yourself right in the middle of that whole web of the organization, politics and all bureaucracy and all those different kinds of things, the amount of impact and influence you can have over change is really very, very limited. And I know that's the world a lot of you probably live in. You work for the city, or you work for the state, or you're within an organization. So it doesn't mean that you're bad or you can't be successful. It just means the amount of influence you're going to have may have a limit to it. Clearly, the best situation when you move that X outside of that web and you influence that entire web from outside. And I learned that in my consulting career because I was an outsider. I didn't work for the organization. I was a contractor who the president of the company once a month paid my invoice. And so I was on the outside of the entire web and trying to influence every piece of it. And so the more you can do that and stay outside and look at the entire web and try to influence it from that perspective, the more success you will have. I mean, for me, I spend a good amount of time communicating with the city council people. Luckily, I've been able to establish good connection with both the chief of staff for the mayor and the director of communications for the mayor. And I interact quite a bit with Kari. I think she may be sitting there over at Heritage Square and the Pueblo Grande folks. And so I really take this very seriously and do the best I can with trying to be on the whole outside of that web and just step in wherever I can be helpful and have an influence. So I asked myself when I first got involved in this, and I saw that I didn't think the history and heritage of Phoenix was getting its due. I didn't think that the city of Phoenix was doing the best job it could to honor our history and heritage. So I asked myself, okay, well, what can I do? Well, here I am. I have limited knowledge of Phoenix history and influential people in Phoenix. This is several years ago. So I don't know a lot about the history. I know that people slept outside, but other than that, I really don't know that much. I had no power. I'm not part of the organization. I don't know people. I can't get face-to-face people. I'm living in California. I'm not an expert. I'm not anybody's boss. So I had no power. I had no budget. I have passion for history. I also have a passion for doing the right thing, which has driven me in this situation because I don't feel like the city of Phoenix has done the right thing by our pioneers and our history and our heritage and our involvement and all those kinds of things. And I am able to research. I'm a pretty good researcher. I'm a pretty good writer. I'm fairly good at public speaking. So I've got those three things going for me. I have an understanding of the change process. So those are some things when I did my own personal assessment. I said, okay, here's what I have. I don't have much power. I have a passion. I see something that's not right. I feel like I want to intervene and help make it better. I can speak, I can write. So I decided, all right, I'm going to research something because I feel like I've got to do something to add to the mix. I want to find out something that not a lot of people know. So I thought, I got to research something and I want to find something I can be passionate about. Something that the decision makers would find interesting, noteworthy, and worth sharing. It's one thing to go to a decision maker and say, well, you should do these things, or I think you ought to go this direction, as opposed to finding out some information that they probably don't know and share that with them. Something interesting, something compelling. So I started going out down this path. And I thought, okay, I'm going to research this. I'm going to put it in a paper form and make it somewhat formal. And then I'm going to send it out to some people that I think are key people within Phoenix. Now you got to remember, from my perspective, I'm living and working in California at this time. So a lot of the efforts that I got started personally were from California, and all I had available was telephones and email and occasional visits. So what I decided to do was to try to figure out what I termed, where is the head of Swilling's Ditch today? Because if you study the history of Phoenix, you understand that it began with a ditch that drew water off of the Salt River into a couple open fields, and they grew some crops and sold them to Fort McDowell and made some money. So I thought, I wonder where that first shovel was dug. And so I started down that track. I said, I want to find out where Jack Swilling or some of his compatriots dug that first ditch. And so that's what I did. And I did find it. I was successful at putting this research paper together. And I thought, okay, who needs to hear this? And so what I did was I put the paper together and I sent it out to some people that I thought would be interested in that. So now the second piece is clarity. So once you've got a passion that's going to drive you and it's in the tough times and the setbacks and not people not calling you back and so forth, once you got passion, you got to be clear. And my screen is blocking a little bit of what I wrote down there, but essentially I know what I'm trying to do. My goal is to get Phoenix history added to the curriculum for elementary and high school students in the Valley. That is my goal. And it's very clear to me that's what I'm trying to accomplish. So when it comes to clarity, you have to be clear in your mind what your end goal is. Know, if any of you are basketball fans, I know the Suns are doing well, but there's a guy named Pat Riley who used to coach for the Lakers and the Miami Heat. He came up with this, which I just love. He says, know what the main thing is and keep the main thing the main thing. Because it's so easy to get derailed sometimes and go off in different directions. So you know when you get there, you got to be clear. So you know when you've been successful. Be aware of what's called the activity trap. Sometimes we feel like, okay, updating the Facebook page or, you know, sending out these emails or doing this, those are activities that make us feel good because we accomplished something. But the question you have to ask yourself, is that really leading to the end goal I'm trying to accomplish? And for me personally, this whole idea of the main thing, keep the main thing the main thing, because it's very easy for me to get off into my own little speaking, little workshops and seminars and talks and so forth, because it's very ego enhancing. My ego gets really big, do these kind of things, but it really doesn't lead that much to getting curriculum into the school. So I'm always fighting that myself. Also, clarity is really important so you can communicate well to others. If you haven't heard the term elevator speech, one way to think about your goal, what you're trying to accomplish, is can you explain this to a key decision maker in 15 seconds going up an elevator? So for instance, if I was in the elevator with Jeff Barton in City Hall, and I don't know what floor he's on, but let's say he's on the 11th floor, which I know the mayor's up there. If he's on the 11th floor and it takes 15 seconds to get there, can I communicate what I'm trying to do to him before the elevator opens? And compelling, it's got to move people. Yeah, people need to feel moved and compelled by whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Now, let's talk a little bit about trust, because trust is the cornerstone of so many things: relationships, change, leadership, all kinds of stuff. So the underlying premise around this is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I'll say that again. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So it doesn't matter how many degrees you have, how many years of work experience you have, how many credentials, how many certificates, how many letters you have after your name. If you don't show people that you care about them as individuals, they're not going to pay attention to you. And there's an example. You may be the smartest historic preservation person in the state, but if people don't trust you, then it doesn't matter. They're not going to listen to you. Behaviors: active listening, courtesy, offer help, make suggestions courteously, follow up, be honest. Those are all specific human behaviors that you need to put in place to help build trust. It takes a long time to gain trust, but can be lost instantly. I remember one of my clients was, believe this or not, it was a tomato sorting and banana ripening operation in northern Kentucky. And the day I walked in that room, and I'm this 30-something hotshot consultant from Southern California, nobody even wanted to talk to me. And I won't even tell, well, but after about 6 months, and I got to know these people and build relationships and so forth, some of them told me exactly what they thought about me the day I walked in the room, being from Southern California. And I won't share it with you. It was pretty graphic. So, but it takes a long time, but you have to be aware of it. Trust is first and foremost. So from my perspective, what I first did was I sent that Jack Swilling ditch report to the city archaeologist and the director of Pueblo Grande, the owner of a historic Phoenix hotel, a guy named Rob Malikian. Some of you may know the director. I saw Michelle come in the room. I sent that to her. She may not remember. That's okay. But I sent it out to people that I thought might be interested in that. And then as best I could, I met with them. I flew into town. I met with Lorraine Montero and Roger Lidman, who was the director of Pueblo Grande at that time. I met with Rob Malikian and Michelle, and just tried to listen and ask questions, get a firsthand perspective on what was happening within Phoenix and whether or not my research was of interest. So next, so you've got some trust built, okay? People realize you're not going to hurt them. You're there just to help and be a good resource. The next thing is you got to establish some credibility. Decision makers and influencers need to know that you know what you're talking about. Bring something new to the table. One of the things that I've taken advantage of is these budget hearings that have been going on. I think they're all over now, but a couple of years ago, they had like 8 or 10 of them around the valley. If gas was $4.50 a gallon then, I probably wouldn't have driven to all of them, but I did then. And I went and I took my 3 minutes to stand up and talk about the importance of Phoenix history and heritage and how I felt it was important that we put some money aside to educate people and so forth. I just went through it again. Several weeks ago, I was out at Pueblo Grande speaking to Carlos Garcia and his staff at the District 8. And not that I had 100% influence over it, but we just saw, thanks to Jim McPherson, he sent a note out that the initial trial budget had $200,000 for threatened buildings, and they more than doubled that in this latest trial budget that's going to the city council. So that was part of my pitch, and several other people, was increase that amount. So budget hearings, you may think, nah, I'm watching basketball or something tonight. They can be very powerful because you stand up and you get 3 minutes and they're listening, they're paying attention. Beware of the curse of knowledge. What that means is sometimes we know things so well that we assume that other people know it as well also, and that's just not the case. So when it comes to Phoenix history and the need for history, heritage, and all that kind of stuff, a lot of people, they don't pay any attention to that kind of stuff. They're busy doing other more important things. So don't think just because this is a huge issue for you and you know what it takes to create education for history and heritage, or how historic preservation should work better, those kinds of things. Don't assume that other people are right on board with you. That's the curse of knowledge. So what I did was I offered free seminars to neighborhood associations. I went and gave evening talks to Garfield and some of the other coalitions of neighborhood associations downtown. I was on Horizon on PBS and interviewed there. I was on radio station, a couple newspaper articles. Rob Maliki and I gave presentations to city departments. I've spoken in front of the city council, both virtually and in person. And then I've attended budget meetings. So those are, whether they take your advice in budget or changing something, that's added value. But the fact that you're being visible and you're credible and you're making your case well, that goes a long ways. I've seen evidence, thankfully. Again, it's not an ego trip for me. I just watch for examples. I had some people tell me that they think Mayor Gallego knows me better than any of the other historians in town because I keep showing my face at these different meetings and speaking and so forth. So here's some examples, article written up in the New Times. And that's a picture of me speaking on PBS. That's me at the city council. There's another article. That's the social media guy for the city. giving me credit for helping him figure out a photograph. This is an article that was in the Republic. And then I was on KTAR radio being interviewed. And then this is a picture Rob Maliki and I gave a presentation. There's about 100 Phoenix City managers there in City Hall. So again, it's really easy to let the ego get going on this sort of thing, but that's not my goal. My goal is to establish visibility, trust, and credibility. And trust in particular can't be accomplished over email or Zoom. It's got to be done in person. So those are some things I've done to establish credibility and trust. Just some of the other things, what I call leave behinds, just business cards that I've had made, building the future Phoenix history. I also put some trivia questions. People love trivia. So I put some trivia questions. I'll let you answer those silently. I won't put anybody on the spot. Then I had a couple shirts made, again, with a nice little logo with the Phoenix bird, building the future Phoenix history. I also did a whole story, a futuristic story. I gave this to everybody on the city council and the mayor. It's called Building the Future of Phoenix History. And it creates a vision, my vision anyway, of what could be done with the city paying more attention to its history and heritage. Professional follow-up, again, this is not about being a pest. You have to be careful. Professional follow-up, ask when would be a good time to check with you. Start off your follow-ups with the words a courtesy follow-up. Try not to say things like, hey, we agreed to XYZ. Why haven't you sent me what you said you're going to send me? You know, people get real defensive with that sort of thing. So just use terminology like this. When you're having a first discussion with somebody, a decision maker, somebody, before you leave that meeting and that discussion, just ask them, hey, what would be a good time? What's a reasonable time for me to get back with you? How could I do that? You want me to call? You want me to email, text, whatever? Handwritten notes are always good. Postcards, I had a bunch of postcards made, and I send out those to various people, city council people, those kind of folks. Fine line between being a pest and a professional follow-up. I put the Sunday evening email. One of the things that I learned thought I would share with you is we all want our emails read, right? Whoever we send them to. There was a research study a couple years ago that said that the majority of emails will be read on Monday morning. So what I write in there, if you want your email read, send it Sunday night. Because you know how we are. Monday morning, we've had 2 days away from work, maybe. So we go through our email a lot more specifically than by Wednesday or Thursday. We're just blowing it off by Wednesday or Thursday. So the odds of your email getting read are greater if the person gets it first thing Monday morning. So where are we today? Well, part of my Pueblo Grande experience is we're able to get an interpretive sign put out there. That's me in my little younger days. So it's an interpretive sign that talks about the Park Four Waters, and it also identifies where that first shovelful of the riverbank of the Salt River was dug. So thank you to Lorraine Montero and Pueblo Grande for putting that together. That was a real success right there. Kari Carlisle, I think Kari is there with her help and guidance, along with Nicole at Pueblo Grande. We've established what we're calling the Phoenix History Consortium, which is a gathering and a group of all the museums within the valley. We started off with just Phoenix. We're working on expanding, getting a website that incorporates all the museums around the valley. Working with the Daughters of the American Revolution. They want to install a historic marker identifying the original history of the valley and Phoenix in particular. So I'm helping them just determine some of the words and the location and those kinds of things. I've established pretty good working relationship with some of the city council members. This is just an example of an email. Maria Lopez, who's the, I think the chief of staff for one of the city council members, Yasmin Ansari. This was about St. James Hotel. Unfortunately, it was demolished 6 or 8 months ago. But this is an example. This is a real success. I saw Ed Dobbins walk in the room, or come in the room anyway, electronically. This is one of the great things. And I had a very small hand in this, but Ed Dobbins, who is just an incredible researcher. If you look in that center row to the right, you'll see a picture that a guy named CJ Dyer, who is one of the mayors of Phoenix. And forever, there was never a photograph of this guy. And so this gallery of mayors, which is right outside Mayor Gallego's office, for the longest time I had a blank space. And then when I was meeting with Mayor Gallego, I looked at that and there was a different guy in there. I go, that's not Mayor Dyer. And so working with Ed and so forth, we got that picture, and Mayor Gallego and her communications director, and they now have an accurate photograph of Mayor CJ Dyer that completes the gallery of mayors for the city of Phoenix. And some people may think, oh, that's no big deal, Steve. Believe me, for historians and for the mayor and the director of communications to get on board and make that happen is a big deal. And thank you to Ed Dobbins for all of his work on that. A couple other things, we're able, even though on a limited basis, we were able to get a celebration of the 150th anniversary of the Phoenix Town Site. This is Mayor Gallego and several of the council members and the city manager at the time, myself, speaking. It was a cold day that day, I'll tell you. Had some two-sided coins made celebrating and commemorating the 150th. Appropriate for the time. Had some COVID masks made with 150th anniversary on them. Also was able to track down the original Phoenix City flag, which was about 100 years old. We were able to find it in the city clerk's office. And there's Rob Malikian, Paul Scharbach, the mayor, and a friend of mine, Ann Doty, were all holding the flag. And I got duly chastised for not having gloves on holding that flag, which was very appropriate. That was fine. And then pursuant to that, we're able to, with the mayor's encouragement and her help and guidance and clearing the path, we're able to get that flag put into a plastic frame and mounted on the first floor of City Hall. And it was only supposed to be there temporarily. I don't know if it's still there, but there's the mayor and I wearing our masks and standing in front of the flag. So that was a nice accomplishment as well. We've also been able for the last 4 years to get the month of March designated Phoenix Pioneers Month. Thank you to Mayor Gallego. There I am holding one of them. And then there's a whole group of cast of characters. Some people you may recognize. Good network of historians, Rob Malikian, Kim Casper, Donna is there, John Jackmar, Paul Scharbach, several others, Michael, Katie, and so forth. So we're able to do that. Just a little pitch. We need a city historian to preserve and educate others of the civic memory of Phoenix. We had one years ago when Phoenix paid a lot of attention to it. His name was James Barney. He did an incredible job. But if we had somebody to fill that role, whether it's honorary or whatever it might be, our lives as historians would be a lot easier. So, quick summary. Be nice to everyone. The majority of decisions will be made without you around. So be nice to everybody that you interact with. I mean, that's a good rule of thumb anyway. But a lot of the decisions around what you're trying to accomplish are going to be made without you being in the room. So be nice to everybody. Spend 80% of your time with the 20% of the people that can and will make decisions. Try not to focus on the naysayers and the NIMBYs and the, those chronic complainers, because whenever you put a group of people together, you always have that slice of people. Try not to put your energy and attention there. know what the main thing is and keep the main thing the main thing. Identify, be clear on what it is you're trying to accomplish. Like in my case, I'm trying to get Phoenix history into elementary and high school curriculum. That's what I'm trying to do, and I'm very clear on that. Okay. Thank you. That's kind of the end. Donna, if you have some questions for me,
Yes,
we have a little bit
well,
of time.
and it's also sort of a comment for others, and it all depends, like the size of your community and the accessibility. But I will say that I write a monthly column in the Arizona Republic on Arizona history, and I wrote an article on that, the flag before it. I mean, after Steve had found it, he had said something at some meeting. And so I did some additional research, found it, wrote an article, and that article came out. And I would say within the next day, I had a call from, one of the mayor's staff people regarding that, and helped kind of in the behind the scenes to get it mounted and who would be the best people to look at it. But as Steve would say, you have to be really patient because they moved very slowly, and the person that we wanted to get to conserve the flag was not available by the time they made a decision that they wanted that person. So anyway, but I do have a question here for you. And this is from Michelle Dobbs, and she said, what are your next steps to your goal of getting Phoenix history into our schools?
Wow, great question. Great question, Michelle. Thank you. And I thought you'd be off on vacation down in Cancun or something by now. Actually, the next steps are working with the mayor and a guy named Tony, her chief of staff, on trying to put some likely historic things together to get school children involved. She wants to do something that includes both children, school kids, as well as something that can be spotlighted for the Super Bowl, which is coming up next year. And I think that's a tremendous combination. So I've been sending some ideas to Tony. And so that's kind of where it stands. But to Donna's point, again, those things move a little more slowly than I care to. But I'm excited that the mayor is taking an active involvement in this. She also has a 4-year-old son named Michael. And I always refer to him when I talk to her about educating him on Phoenix history. So she's very well attuned to that as well.
Are there any other questions? I mean, I have a number of questions, even though I've attended this one before, but I want to give anybody else, you can put it in the chat. But one of the things that I know is with organizations, some organizations like the DAR has grants, and they have historic preservation grants. And hopefully this will give organizations like that and other organizations some ideas of what you might pursue, and you might start talking about it now and doing your research, but it may be another year before you can apply for the grant, et cetera, because things move slowly. You have to build a trust with that group. And I don't know, have you had much experience with being involved in grants writing? Or these things? No, I understand that.
Yeah, I make this motion when talk about grants. Way too much detail. I like people who talk to me in bumper stickers, Donna. The idea of writing a grant is really pretty scary for a guy like me. Yeah, I know it's important, and they're huge, and I know there's a lot of money out there. I stumble around a little bit with having to do them myself. I know people like Kari, she can whip them out in an afternoon. I know that for sure, but I just don't have that expertise.
Well, it's not so much of having the expertise as that you have the expertise or the language or the passion. And that's sort of what I'm trying to explain to some of the attendees, is that's what becomes important when you work with whoever is actually writing the grant, is bring all of these, this passion, keeping your, eye on the main thing, which is the main thing to do.
Right, right.
Not sure I said that quite.
Yeah. Just if I can reflect back to Michelle's question for a second, and Michael Cady, who is in the audience as well, he has reminded me of one of the snags. It's just a snag, we'll overcome it, is when you talk to a lot of educators, whether it's curriculum leaders within school districts or superintendents, is there's this automatic snag that if it doesn't fit the state standards, they're not going to do it. And I don't necessarily know that that's 100% true if you just do some in-services with some teachers and principals and so forth, but that's just one of the challenges that we have in getting the curriculum in place.
Well, and that would be probably the same thing in a lot of these dealings with, especially if you're dealing with governmental groups, is figuring out how you get around whatever they say and explain to them that we're really on the same page.
Mhm.
My language is just a little bit a different language, but it means the same thing as what
Mhm.
you're talking about.
Right.
And again, it's that subtle listening and listening to what they say and going, oh, yes, well, that's the same thing as XYZ.
Right.
So, any other questions? I don't want to monopolize this. As a reminder, this has been recorded. We usually do a little editing of it, and when it is all ready and then is posted on both the Arizona Preservation website as well as our YouTube channel, we will send out a notice to all of you so that you will know that it's free. There's no charge for that there, and share it widely.
Mhm.
And, don't forget, if you have an idea for a possible presentation at the preservation conference, which will be in Yuma, do consider submitting that. And I guess that is going to be all for us. And thank you very much, Steve, for joining us.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone.